Good evening, everybody. Thanks very much for coming out tonight. On behalf of the Tattered Cover Bookstore and the Rocky Mountain Land Library, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's Land Series program. The Land Series will continue next Wednesday night as author Hannah Nordhaus discusses her new book, The Beekeeper's Lament: How One Man and 500 Million Honeybees Help Feed America. It's a wonderfully written account of both bees and beekeepers and the challenges that they face in our increasingly stressed world. Tonight, the Land Series returns to one of the constant themes of our first 10 years, the central role of water in our lives and in the life of our planet. Joining us tonight is Alex Prud'homme, author of The Ripple Effect: The Fate of Fresh Water in the 21st Century, a book that helps us appreciate the surprising fact that water, not oil, could be both the defining resource of the next century and the greatest source of global tension in the years to come. Combining intensive research with a journalist's knack for talking to the right people on all sides of an issue, Alex Prud'homme has done justice to a very complex subject. And that's a rare accomplishment that the arid West celebrated many years ago with Mark Reisner's Cadillac Desert. And now we have Alex Prud'homme's fresh and global look for the next century. Alex Prud'homme is the author of several books, including the New York Times bestseller, Julia Child's My Life in France, a wonderful collaboration between Alex and his great aunt, Julia. Joining Alex tonight during the question and answer period is hydrologist Bob Moran, a water consultant who has worked across the country and across the globe, from Africa to Indonesia, South America, and beyond. And we're very fortunate to have both Alex and Bob share their perspectives tonight. Here's what Bill McKibben had to say about tonight's book. Both drought and flood are on the rise, and Alex Prud'homme, in his fine new account, helps us understand why. We've taken the planet's hydrology for granted for 10,000 years, and that's a luxury we can no longer afford. Please join me in welcoming Alex Prud'homme.
Thanks, Jeff, and thank you all for coming. It's a great pleasure to be here at the Tattered Cover. It's important that we all support our independent bookstores, and the Tattered Cover has a national reputation. I can tell you that all of us writers in New York, where I live, pine to come here, and so we're very glad. I'm very glad to see you all out here supporting the bookstore and reading series like this one. So thank you. As Jeff was saying, water is a subject of the moment. It's making headlines across the country now. You look at the South, and there are record-breaking droughts. Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Florida. Not only are they in drought, many of them are on fire right now. There are two major fires in Arizona, one of which is the largest in state history. Texas has already lost 1.5 million acres to wildfires. Florida has had something like 2,500 wildfires so far this year. It's a kind of a vision of Hades in a way. At the same time, we have record-breaking floods in the Midwest, Mississippi and Nebraska, the Dakotas, and there is more rain and a deep snowpack, and so it looks as though those floods may continue well into the summer, maybe all the way through August. So what's going on here? We've got this schizophrenic weather, and it's forcing people to confront water and questions about how we use water and value water in a new way. And this is really also an indicator of what's to come. Despite denials by some quarters, climate change is real. We don't know exactly what causes it, but it's certainly a measurable impact, and climate change will speed up the hydrologic cycle. That means there'll be more water vapor in the air. That means there'll be more rain, there'll be more storms, more intense storms. It'll change local weather patterns. Some places that are now dry will become wet, and vice versa. Or places that are very dry will become even drier. Places that are very wet, especially on the coasts, will become wetter. So this is a sort of indication of things to come. The good news is that we do have a series of steps that we can take and strategies that will help us negotiate this new environment, should we care to apply ourselves. Unfortunately, as my pal John Stewart said the other night, the human nature, we tend to wait for things to become a crisis before we do anything. To which I said to him backstage, well, you know, with water, if we wait for a crisis, it's going to be too late. From my perspective, this wake-up call that we're getting this year, right now, is something we ought to pay attention to. And we ought to start having a very serious national discussion about water and our relationship to it. Now, I came to this subject from way back. As a kid, I was always obsessed with water. I loved to fish and swim and boat. I was a oceanography minor in college. But the specific impetus for this particular book came when I was working with Julia Child on her memoir, My Life in France. And one day, Julia and I were in her apartment in Santa Barbara. We were having lunch together, and Julia being Julia, she pulled out a bottle of French mineral water. And she started to tell me that the French view mineral water as a health aid, essentially. They'll buy particular mineral waters for their particular mineral flavors and their alleged health benefits. They view mineral water as a digestive. It helps your digestion, and they really treat bottled water almost like wine. Americans, on the other hand, Julia said, like their water stripped of all minerals and all tastes, and we prefer to think of bottled water as a healthy beverage, an alternative to soda. And I thought that, well, that's a nice idea for an article. I'll look at the two cultures through the prism of bottled water. Filed that away. Then that evening, we had dinner with Julia's niece, Violet Cousins, and her husband, Bob Moran. As Jeff said, Bob is a hydrogeologist who travels around the world doing really interesting water projects. I think of him as an Indiana Jones of water, swashbuckling water guy. He started telling us that water is an access resource, meaning that it is the resource that underlies all others. So whether you're talking about agriculture or mining or oil and gas extraction or power generation, all of these things require large volumes of water. And this century, not long from now, and in fact it's starting to happen right now, these resources are going to start to come into conflict with each other because there's a limited amount of water. And this is going to force another series of very difficult questions. How do we prioritize water use? Where? When? These are not abstract questions. They're very difficult. You know, do you farm that land in Montana, say, with alfalfa, or do you use the water there to try to extract oil and gas, you know, through hydrofracking? Or do you build a mine nearby? You can't do it all. At the same time, the population is growing. As the population grows, there's greater demands for water, greater demand for goods. So these are going to be very, very difficult questions to answer. So this got me really excited, and I decided, well, forget the article, this is really a book. And so I had to finish Julia's book, and Julia died halfway through the project, and then the book came out. It was successful, and I went on a book tour. And even while I was on Julia's book tour, I began to report this book and began collecting data. And By the time I got back, I had a huge mound of information.